Welcome, welcome. You are at the House Alpens virtual trade tasting for autumn 2020. Our tasting today is going to run about 1 hour's time. We're going to taste through 6 different items. So if you received your little tasting kit, now's the time to crack that open and set out your glasses. At any time during the presentation, you are welcome to tap in a message to us. We'll be answering throughout, as well as there'll be a live Q&A session at the conclusion. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are and who I am. My name is Eric Seed. I'm the founder and owner of House Alpens. Established the business, was on my own back in 2005. But today we're a team of 17 full-timers living as far afield as New York, Western Mass, the Washington, D.C. area, Atlanta, Austin, Denver, and of course here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. We are national importers, and we also have our own distribution team. We saw the photos in the state of New York. We do cover all but West Virginia, so 49 states and territories, and yes, including Hawaii, that you see here in the photos. So, people, place, and purpose. These 3 words underpin all that we do and reflect in our portfolio selections. The people. It's not just us. It's hardly about us. We work almost exclusively with small family producers who have made for generations in the place of provenance what we represent. We are as loyal to them as they are true to their heritage. They're good people to work with, and their commitment reflects in the qualities and consistencies we all seek. The producers you see here today, that man front and center, standing high on the hill, that's Jürgen Haas. He's the current generation producer for the Zerben Stone Pine Liqueur that we'll be tasting today. A few other names and faces you may recognize here. And place. Place matters, whether by source of ingredients, soil conditions, style of production, cellar conditions, and of course the drinking traditions. Our customers love the stories and the history. Some of our very first customers for Batavia, Iraq, were readers of the Master and Commander series, who wanted to taste the Batavia rack that they read about that the British drank while in their bunkers along the lines of the Torres Vedras, catching the French off guard. This is back in the 1810 Peninsular Campaign. The French thought there were no defenses until Lisbon. Little did they know about those sitting in the bunker drinking the Batavia rack. Or for our tropical and tiki enthusiast, who want true Barbados falernum. Of course, that's the Velvet Falernum, John D. Taylor's. They see that as a cornerstone to so many of their drinks, but they want to know it's the real deal. And here you see it, a reference, an advertisement for a Barbados newspaper, 1805, one of the earliest known references to the drink falernum as we know it today. Place also matters in our travel, ambitions, and our dreams, an escape from everyday life, and especially from this awful pandemic. Think of that drink in your hand as a stepping stone to actually being there. But place also matters, in our what's referential to us in our everyday life. Simple to say, it's like the smells and taste of a place, but that magical smell of fresh cut grass, the grig arising from the fields, the smoke and woodsyness of the campfire, the minerality, the salinity of the ocean, and the pines of the forest, or your Christmas tree. We believe these smells and tastes have real reference and relevance to a broad audience who can relate to them. So that gets to the products themselves. So while many of the brand names might not at first be familiar, the taste and the smells are referential to their place of origin in the world we live in our home cities. Today we'll taste the Zerben Stone Pine, and as like think it's the taste of the woods. The Amaro Sfumato, smokiness. Violet, flowers. Apricots, we all know apricots. It was in our baby food, and it's delicious. Also underpins so many great drinks. Falernum, a cornerstone to tropical and tiki drinks. Batavia Rack, it's like the mezcal of the rum world. And of course, Dolan Vermouth, sort of one of the greats of the world of vermouth. Bringing these things home to our, for our customers, it's more relevant than ever today, not just because of a revival of cocktails in and of themselves, but what people are doing in their homes and even how they're building their homes. Today, it's quite common, if not standard, when building a kitchen to have an open format with a bar-like seating in the kitchen. And some even build in their own home bar. Look closely on that home bar, and you'll find on the second shelf a bottle of our Dolan Genevieve. In this picture from a random Google search about that. What we're not going to focus on today are the Dolan and Koki that many of you may already carry. Thank you. But we can for sure take any questions you have on these items or anything else we're not tasting through the message section or in the Q&A at the finish. So let's get started tasting.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Clark, the National Marketing Manager for House L Pens, and I'm going to give you a brief tour of our website, starting obviously with the homepage. And right now I'm going to take my video off screen so that you can see the entire website and I'm not blocking anything. On the homepage, you have links to articles that are written both by members of our team as well as outside sources. And up at the top here, you can see navigational menus. You can search for our products in a few different ways, by category, by mousing over the wines and spirits menu, by producer, and by origin if you're looking for wines and spirits from a certain country. Next up is our recipe database, which really comes in handy, especially when you have somebody come into your store or restaurant wanting to know, hey, what do I do with, for instance, Koki Americano Bianco? I had this already checked off in Choose by Product. When you come to the recipe database, you will have all of our recipes in a big long list, almost 500 of them. And you can also search for recipes via these different parameters on the left-hand side. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to click Koki Americano Bianco again so that I can narrow my recipes down to recipes that use Koki Americano Bianco. And again, here you can see them in a big long list. Another really easy way to search for recipes for one particular product is simply just to use our search window and type in your desired product. And one of the search results will always be the drink recipes for that product. And here, when you get this search result, they are all on one page. So that comes in handy. I'm going to go ahead and click on the first recipe, the Adelita cocktail. And when you do that, you get to the cocktail detail page, which includes information in a thumbnail view on all of the products that are used in that cocktail. And if you click on a particular product here, then you go into a more detailed product page for that item. And you got here everything you get from bullet points about this thing to producer information, to a map showing where it's from, information about the category, about pairings, and so forth. You get a sort of a truncated list of recipes that we consider to be the canonical recipes for that product. And then all the setup information that distributors, retailers, and the like need, including downloads for bottle shots, label shots, and shelf talkers. Now, if you're looking for this information sort of all in one place for all of the products, the next page I'm going to show you will come in handy. and that is under our resources menu. You want to go to Setup. And here you find all this key information for all of our products. And if you scroll horizontally, you'll be able to get the entire view, basically. Now, if you're looking at this information and indeed this website on a smartphone, you'll want to put it in landscape mode because some of the things won't show up, especially these big horizontal items, unless you're in that mode. And that also goes for the recipe database. In order for this drop-down menu to be optimized on a cell phone, put it into landscape mode and you should be able to get to where you need to go. Also under the resources menu is storage and handling. And this is really good for people who might be unfamiliar with the categories of wine that we're known for, particularly aperitif wines. Information about how long they keep in the fridge, information about temperature at which they should be served, and so forth. And we also have that information for all of the wines in our portfolio, including the Sotalon Selections portfolio of oxidative wines. And with that, I am going to hand you over to Eric again, who will tell you about two of our historic French aperitif wines. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. So, please open your test kit. Take out the sample of Camoes. Camoes Vermouth Blanc de Chambéry. In the history of vermouth, there are two historic designations of origin for vermouth. Torino, today Piemonte in Italy, and Chambéry, which is today in the Savoie of France. But when vermouth was first made in those regions, they were both part of the same kingdom of Savoy. So, Chambéry, where is it? It's about an hour southeast of the city of Lyon, and it's at the foothills of the French Alps. In the city of Chambéry, the first producer was Dolin, starting their vermouth production in 1821. Incidentally, had their 200th anniversary next year. But it was roughly 30 years later that one of their employees, a fellow named Claudius Camoes, decided to leave and start up his own vermouth production. And in 1881, he introduced what became his signature product, Vermouth Blanc. Now, his claim was that he was the inventor of Blanc vermouth. And while there were other pale styles of vermouth that preceded, Claudius employed the latest in filtration. But as important, he had a unique style to his, which really set his apart. His came with notes of stone fruits, alpine flowers, and a deep, resonant undercurrent of wormwood. Today we taste this and we think that the deeper profile marries so well with whiskey, perhaps better than any other pale or Blanc vermouth. The vermouth, and his vermouth, is perhaps most famous for a cocktail made not in France, made not in the US initially, but one of the most famous cocktails of Cuba, El Presidente. So we'll see from the document on the left, that was the approval that was given by both the local French authorities as well as the Council of Cuba, allowing it to be imported into Cuba. And for many years, it was the only vermouth of France that was in Cuba. So, aside from El Presidente, perhaps the most famous of drinks, and probably the easiest for the home consumer, is the Savoy Spritz. And it's as simple as it gets. It's simply Camoes Blanc, our friend the soda siphon, over ice, sliced strawberries. That drink became so famous that roughly 30 or so years after his creation of Camauze Blanc, most of the, at which point probably close to 10 producers in by the 1920, 1930, most of them started to make a bottled strawberry vermouth. Now, many of us, simple on soda, works beautifully. You'll find that its tremendous depth of flavor is pleasing not just in spritzes, but that depth plays really well when just simply mixing 50-50 with other spirits. As mentioned earlier, it doesn't simply have to be just Blanc spirits, gin, vodka, or tequila, but it plays really, really well with bourbon or rye. It's important to note that in France, the most popular style of vermouth sold is the Blanc vermouth style. And again, today, the most popular drinks with it is that simple spritz with soda. That said, as many of us know, the world of vermouth had its grand apex probably in the early part of the 20th century. And by the 70s and the 80s, the market was in decline everywhere, not just here in the United States. And as that market shrank, folks at Camauze did close down their facility and contracted with Dolin to produce this vermouth. And given the resurgence of vermouth and also interest from some interested customers, Dolin had kept the product in some limited production over the years. And finally, about 2-3 years ago, restarted the formal production. So we're very happy to be able to offer it to you here in the United States. So if there are any more questions on Camauze, please do tap them in the message bar, or you can ask us at the end. Next in our presentation is Bonal Gentian Kina. So Bonal has long been a darling amongst many of us and in the bar community, doing magic in so many simple drinks. So what is it? So Bonal is an aromatized wine. It's a quinquina. So it's not a vermouth, where vermouth has a base of wormwood, but instead has quinine. Quinine we know principally from tonic water, but also today there are a number of other quinquina that you'll find on market, including the Cap Corse and the Bia quinquinas, which we also make available. You'll also see, as by the name, that it has in it gentian. And this gentian root, it's a flowering plant. It gives a florality and an earthy back palate bitter. There's also a round and supple front palate that you'll taste, and that comes from using mistels instead of wine. Mistels being fortified, unfermented grape juice. That's a common practice in the world of quinquina, to use mistels instead of wine. And you'll also find with Bonal, there's a back palate that's bitter and dry. All in all, a very different profile than what we maybe expected, what we might be used to with vermouth. So the consequence of all this is you'll find that Bonal gives space and texture for the aromas of apples and the balance and tannins of whiskeys. And I'd say that few things are better to pair with the sometimes bold tannins that you'll get with many of our new American bourbons and ryes. That gentian element to this. Gentian's famous for imparting refreshing feeling on the palate and a calming to your constitution. There was a time when that feeling was associated with getting more value from your food and living better. Hence their old slogan, the key to the appetite. But we're selling alcohol, not health claims, but we do sell deliciousness. In the early 20th century, Bonal was a sensation in the southeast of France. So adored was the product for its feeling that it was adored in the sporting community. Believe it or not, in the 1930s, they were a sponsor, amongst others, of the Tour de France. That said, for us, the focus is, its taste, its deliciousness, its application in drinks. And, while in the home country, it's typically consumed with soda or tonic water. And I would say as well, in the summertime, Bonal with tonic and a squeeze of lemon, it does its magic. But come wintertime, having Bonal with, say, fresh pressed apple cider, bourbon, and a squeeze of lemon, it's just utterly sensational. Highly recommended. In tandem with that, at holiday times, as we know, everyone loves something bubbly. So, pairing Bonal with the ciders that you may carry in your bar or retail shop, it's a natural pairing. So, if you have any questions about Bonal, by all means, tap them in the message bar. We can address them for you at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Next, we're going to talk about one of our favorite smaller Italian producers, a great old traditional Amaro and liqueur producer in Trento in the north of Italy, Antica Erboristeria Cappelletti. And everything you need to know about them and their history is really right there in the name. Antica, old. They're old. In particular, what we think of in the world of Italian liqueurs is if you come from before World War I, then you started in those kind of older traditions of using regional ingredients and often keeping a lot of different recipes around. And that's certainly the case with Cappelletti. Erboristeria means natural pharmacist. And in fact, Cappelletti established a shop in the center of Trento, the town that they're in. And it's still there. They don't own it, but a lot of their products are still sold there, right on the main square. It's right where the Christmas markets are held every year. And of course, Cappelletti, the family, of which Maddalena and Luigi are the folks that keep the fires burning today. What's a lot of fun about working with Maddalena and Luigi is that they genuinely love bitterness. The Italian domestic market for these sorts of things often likes things a little bit sweeter, a little bit thicker, a little bit richer. They're often drinking Amaro next to a pretty bitter espresso. But the palate and the skills and the history and the tradition of Cappelletti is very much more toward that bitter backbone, which is so important for us when we're mixing cocktails with their great products. Like a lot of producers, they have a lot of recipes, a big, thick recipe book, but they only make a few of those products for themselves to market, and the rest they make sort of once a year for the Christmas market or for their little shop, all sorts of different things. But their real focus and what we get to do with them are old traditional bitter recipes. One of the other things that goes through all of their products is that they don't really love caramel. We already talked about they don't love super sweet, but caramel in and of itself, something you see a lot in a lot of mainstream Amari, doesn't work all that well in cold cocktails, we find. If you think about eating a Milky Way bar right out of the fridge, it's kind of the same thing. If you take an Amaro or a vermouth or an aromatized wine that's super high in caramel, it's going to make a cocktail very thick. You may lose some of the nuance of the other things you've put in the drinks. A great example of that is Amaro Sfumato, which is dark, but it's dark not from caramel, but from rhubarb root, the natural rhubarb root tincture that provides all the smokiness as well to Amaro Sfumato. If you haven't tried that in a while, I definitely recommend you check it out. Another part of the history of Erboristeria Cappelletti is a penchant for wine-based products. In fact, 3 of the products that we do with them are wine-based. And we talked about them being old, being pre-1919, pre-World War I. That was the case back then. If you were a small producer, you only had the ingredients around you, and distilled alcohol was pretty expensive. So in Trento, in the Alto Adige, they had wine. And they used it. They used it as their basis, and it created this great diversity of products, but also this products with wonderful acidity and brightness, which leads for us to mixability today. Today, we're going to talk about one of those products. So go ahead and open your bottle of Aperitivo Cappelletti. If you've got a bit of club soda around, this would be a great time to splash it in and make what we call a real spritz. Cappelletti Aperitivo is a red bitter. This is the world that's become quite burgeoning today. There's as many as 20 on the shelves of some bottle shops. The red bitter category stretches from very, very light, maybe even as low as 11% alcohol, things that are often used in spritz type drinks, to bigger, heavier, thicker, sweeter, more bitter liqueur and amari that are often used in things like Negronis. What's fun about Aperitivo Cappelletti is it works in kind of both of those realms. It's wine-based, so it's got a lot of texture without a ton of sugar. It may come across as quite sweet, but it's actually quite a bit drier than pretty much everything else in this category. The wine also brings some acidity to the party, which helps make your drinks more refreshing. Aperitivo Cappelletti is also naturally colored. If you don't want to have red dye number 40 in your life, the traditional carmine coloring of Aperitivo Cappelletti is a great old call out to a tradition in the region, but also an expression of wealth and good taste all over Italy. We talk about Aperitivo Cappelletti and mixing in both worlds of the red bitter. Spritzes, which we'll talk about a lot more when Lee comes on next. Yeah, that word spritz doesn't mean one specific drink. That word spritz really refers back to the incredible craze for fizzy water and fizzy drinks in the late 1800s, the drink of leisure. But because that time was before 1919, a lot of those fizzy drinks were made with aromatized wines, and some of them were made with wine-based red bitter. So you see here a very typical spritz idea: Aperitivo Cappelletti and club soda. You don't need the wine in it for texture or for that vinous character, because the wine is already in the Cappelletti, but a little splash of wine or sparkling wine wouldn't hurt at all. Now the other side, of course, is the sort of bigger, thicker, richer stirred drink side. We think a lot about the Negroni and the Boulevardier. What's fun about Aperitivo Cappelletti in the Negroni especially is it just brings a delicacy to the drink. The acidity of the wine, the lower sugar, really allows you to taste all the ingredients in the drink really well, including the gin. You know, if you make a big, thick, sweet Negroni, sometimes you lose that nuance of the gin, or you lose the structure of the gin. So the other thing with that extra acidity and that extra brightness makes a Negroni that's really an aperitif cocktail, a Negroni that can get your evening started, get your meal started. You don't have to wait for it to dilute with ice for the sugariness to go down. So that's a very brief look at Aperitivo Cappelletti and a wonderful producer that we love in the north of Italy, Cappelletti. Next, we're going to talk about the broader idea of the spritz. We've talked a little bit about that already with the love of fizzy drinks and fizzy water, but Lee Edwards has got all the details.
Thank you, Jake. Before I talk about the spritz, I want to encourage all of you to make one if you so choose. If you have any Bonal and Camots still in your bottles, those are pretty delicious, mixed in equal parts with club soda. So mix those up if you have it. Now let's talk about spritzes. It is due to the invention of carbonated water decades before people started spritzing that we're able to even talk about the spritz today. I would love to talk more about all that went into the inventing of carbonated water, but that unfortunately is a rabbit hole I don't have time to go down today. The word spritz does come from the German verb spritzen, meaning to spray. This is a reference to adding water to wine. What we know of today as northeastern Italy was in the late 18th century and early 19th century part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Austrians living in that part of Italy at that time would add water to the Italian wines to get a lower alcohol level, making it more reminiscent of the ales and lagers that they were accustomed to drinking in their home villages. Austrian soldiers, interestingly, popularized using the word spritz in the World War I era. And the most common way to splash water into wine, starting in the late 1800s, was the siphon. And a nice quote from Francois Monti, a wonderful historian from Spain. The siphon was a basic element of all aromatized wine cultures. People were spritzing in France, Italy, and Spain from the late 19th century. The soda siphon first became famous in hotels, bars, later movies and TV. I myself first learned what a siphon was from movies and TV growing up. And then it became even a part of home entertaining by the mid-1900s. And now to talk about the modern spritz and variations thereof. The spritz has a broad and expansive history in service, far beyond that of one individual drink or one individual country. Spritzes truly reflect a regional perspective on the aperitif. You look at bitter aperitifs in northern Italy, and not just of the red variety. You look at white wine spritzes in England and Austria, Rojo Vermouth in the Barcelona area, and Chambéry Blanc in France. As Eric mentioned, the most popular vermouth style in France. So thinking of the spritz as more than an aperitif and club soda also opens up possibilities. Think about sparkling wine. You could do a Negroni Sbagliato with vermouth, bitter, and sparkling wine. Thinking about lagers or ale. Oh, and here, that was a nice photo of our Cocchi Rosa and soda. Very delightful. Looks like a nice place to be right now. The next slide, lovely photo of the Amer Frontière. So you got a 8-ounce lager with an 1.5 ounces of Bonal, reminiscent of the beer pecan in France. If you want to get into ciders, fall is the perfect time to do an alt aperitif, which is Bonal with apple cider. And then tonic. Examples, Dolan Genepi with tonic. Call that the après-ski. And the spritz that I encouraged you all to make a few minutes ago, if you made that with tonic, you would get what we have in our recipe database as the Chambéry tonic. So a lot of ways to look at the spritz. And I want to leave you with a quote from a wonderful book from a few years ago. The spritz's biggest secret is that it is really much more than a recipe or a category of drinks that calls for the mixing of Italian booze and wine. The spritz is a regional perspective on the aperitif. And with that, I want to hand you back to Jake Parrott so that he can tell you all about Hayman's London Dry Gin. Jake?
Thanks, Lee. Now we're going to move over to more the spirited side of our presentation today, and we're going to start with Hayman's London Dry Gin. So go ahead and open up that sample bottle, pour some in a glass, try a little by itself, but then I highly recommend that you dilute it about 50-50 with some still water and try it again. We'll talk through that more as we go through this. Hayman's one of our favorite producers, of course. We've got a range of gins from them. We started with Hayman's Old Tom Gin and the green label there, the Royal Dock Gin, the 57% alcohol Navy Gin, not just a Navy strength gin, but a true Navy gin sold to the fleet at the Royal Dock in Deptford. and a slow gin, which has two remarkable characteristics. One, you can really taste the sloes, the beautiful heirloom berries from the English countryside, but you can also taste the gin, which is the really key point for Hayman's when they make slow gin. The Hayman family date back to 1863 in the gin world. They're the oldest gin distilling family in London. They started in Cale Street in Chelsea in southwest London with the Burroughs, James Burrough, eventually Marjorie Burrough, who became famous for gins and liqueurs from then, and their recipes survive today. Today, the fourth generation, Chris Hayman, keeps those fires burning, and his daughter and son, Miranda and James, run the business. Their production, their gin recipes have stood the test of time, and that's a hard test. You know, there's a lot of different things that gin has had to be over the years. It's had to be cost effective, but most of all, gin has had to be versatile. It's had to be used in a lot of different ways. If you go back to the dawn of the cocktail era, there weren't that many gins around, and there were a lot of gin cocktails. Some were strong and small, like a martini. Some were long and heavily diluted, like a French 75 or a silver gin fizz. And a gin had to work in every single one of those contexts. And the way Hayman's makes gin makes sure that it can. These are the most versatile gins on the market. Hayman starts with traditional botanicals. No flowers or herbs. Herbaceous spikes will often make it hard for a gin to go with mint or vermouth. Plenty of juniper, of course, a bit of citrus, spices, bitter notes, and of course that all-important orris root, which creates such great texture and fixes the other aromatics. Those botanicals are soaked for 24 hours, cold, in the pot of Marjorie, which is Hayman's famous pot still, and then the gins come out of Marjorie. Hayman's London Dry is the flagship. It has to be the most balanced because London Dry is the style that grew to be the most important style for gin cocktails. So Hayman's London Dry, you've got it in your glass right now. Hopefully you've diluted it 50-50 like we talked about. I want you to taste it 50-50, and I want you to notice a couple of things. One, it's still quite rich in flavor. It's still quite robust. That's a really important characteristic for a gin that you're going to make a lot of different drinks with. We call it dilutability, but you might just call it power or intensity. It's still balanced. You don't have a ton of flavor spikes one way or another. But the last important thing, I think, is something that manifests when you taste Hayman's London Dry diluted like this, which is this dark, sort of oily character. I get it on the middle or middle back of my tongue. It really comes out when you dilute it. I was in the Hayman distillery last November, and the distiller was working on some juniper-only distillates. He was checking juniper berries from a few different suppliers. And so I got to taste a line of juniper-only distillates with the distiller. And the thread that ran through all of them was that dark, rich, oily character. And it really hit home for me that that is what juniper tastes like when you distill it. It doesn't taste like pine. It doesn't taste like a forest. That at its core, juniper, when it's distilled and held together, has this great, dark, oily character. And that comes through, I think, in spades when you taste Hayman's London Dry diluted. So what do you have here? You have a gin that's nicely dilutable, it's nicely balanced, and has plenty of flavor of juniper. To me, that's what it means for a gin to be versatile. So it's great for a gin tonic, which is a long diluted drink. It's great for a drink like a blonde Negroni, which has a lot of other botanical things going on and provides a botanical backbone. But you know, what you have in your glass right now is just a no vermouth martini. And while we love dry vermouth in our martinis, of course, plenty of folks out there don't. And that Hayman's London Dry works great when all you want is a no vermouth martini. Now we're going to talk about another one of our gin products. It's our one American product. It's a Damson gin made from heirloom Damson plums grown in New York State. And we have a very special guest today who happens to be the producer of Averell Damson Gin. That's Scott Cron. Scott?
Thanks for the intro, Jake. I'm excited to share some information with you all about the Averell Damson Gin liqueur. The inspiration for the product harks back to the turn of the 20th century. This is a time many consider to be the golden age of fruit and vegetable propagation in the United States. From about 1885 to 1915, the USDA actively worked with American farmers to develop over 7,500 new and unique fruit and vegetable varieties to support the emerging markets. Government commissioned artists were tasked with cataloging the new varieties as watercolors. And today, the Pomological Watercolor Collection is still housed at the USDA Library, Maryland, and considered to be one of the more unique collections in the United States. Unfortunately, this progressive era was short-lived, and by the middle of the 20th century, the emergence of the supermarket, commercial farming, and mass distribution forced many of these varieties into extinction. When you look at the endangered fruit marking on Averil's label, the lion's share of heirloom varieties went into extinction because of lack of use as opposed to overuse. And fast forward to today, when you go into a supermarket, I mean, there's even generally 4 or 5 varieties within a popular fruit category, such as apples. And that just goes to show how little variety there are in heirloom fruit varieties. In terms of the damson itself, it's one of the oldest known fruit varieties, one of the oldest known plum varieties. It originated in Damascus, Syria, and then it spread west. It was later prized by the Crusaders, Romans, and early American colonial settlers. It's a little bit larger than a cherry with a small clingstone pit, and it's incredibly sour with floral notes and warm winter spice undertones, and the skin is extremely stringent, bitter. Relative to the fruits of other gin-based cordials, which are wild-grown and food for the deer if not consumed, damsons are a cultivated variety. They're prized by chefs, brandy producers, and producers of plum jam, where they really are a star. And really today, Red Jacket Orchards in upstate New York is one of the only orchards in the Northeast to grow damsons as a commercial endeavor, roughly 1 row of 25 trees. When it comes to production, it's important to get into the origin of these gin-based fruit liqueurs. And their origin is really a result of an abundance of wild-grown fruit within cottage regions across Europe. With very little equipment or technology, people could make these elixirs simply by steeping the local fruit in spirit and sugar. And the results of the maceration method include some interesting tertiary flavors. However, the longer the steep, the less representative the end product is of the fresh fruit, or as they say in the orchard industry, fruit out of hand. By contrast, Averil is made with the fresh pressed juice of damson plums. The juicing process is laborious. It requires modern machinery, and the end result, produces a liqueur that's more austere than say with maceration. It more closely represents the characteristics of biting into a fresh damson. One of the other main differences with Averil is in the alcohol content. Whereas categories such as sloe gin, they have no restrictions on alcohol percentage by TTB. Yet, TTB requires that gin liqueurs, the category gin liqueurs, be above 30% ABV. So consequently, Averil is quite a bit drier than other fruit liqueurs, and because of that, it makes it a really solid candidate as a base spirit in many classic and modern cocktails. I mean, I often look at using the product, more as a base spirit in those proportions than as a liqueur. And that really leads into how you mix with Averil. It's an obvious choice for fall consumption. However, it begs for carbonation in the form of dry sparkling wine, club soda, or ginger beer. And this really makes it a true 4-season product. It works wonderfully in stirred drinks with inherent acidity that livens up drinks that tend to be muddy, while inserting some interesting flavor notes of stone fruit and warm winter spice. And one of the last things I would say with Averil is it provides amazing color in drinks that you mix with it. Some historians will even claim that the skins of damsons were once used as dyes in the production of textiles and other household items. So yeah, that's about it for the Averil Damson Plum Gin Liqueur. With that, I'm going to pass you back to Eric Seed. He's going to chat with you about a product that's near and dear to all of our hearts, being the first product in our portfolio, which is the Zierbenz Stone Pine Liqueur.
Please look to your samples and pull the sample bottle of Zierbenz Stone Pine Liqueur of the Alps. Now, while the thought of a pine liqueur might well be unexpected, most all of us can appreciate the smell of the Christmas tree, the smells when you walk in the woods or when you're out skiing or golfing, hiking. It's something we can refer to, even if we're not familiar with the taste. What you're about to taste is a long tradition extending from central Austria down into northern Italy. It's a tradition that's never stopped. It's alive and well, and you'll find it's this product, which they call Zierbenschnaps, served in restaurants, bars, and ski resorts all throughout these regions. The name Zierbenz, or its root, Zierben, is the name of this little baby pine cone that grows on the Arola stone pine. Some call it the Swiss stone pine. So it all starts with the picking of these cones in late June, early July, and rushing them back to the farm to macerate in wine or spirit. So the picking of the cones. You might wonder, do they really climb the trees? Oh yes, and I joined them for their harvest one year and took the photos that you see here. This is in a forest in South Steiermark, right near the border with Carinthia. So I joined this fella that you see on the right, and I ascended over 50 feet in childlike glee before my nerves really came alive. And trust me when I say that the farmers pick only what they can reach. When you're done, you're covered in this pine dust that you forget about after some beer and sausage. So few might realize that when the pine cones are very young, they're technically and still very much a fruit. And specific with the Arola stone pine, this fruit can be quite juicy. It's highly aromatic and slightly sweet. What they do is they take the cones and literally just slice them, and that's it. It's not a pine nut liqueur, although there are pine nuts within. It is a pine fruit liqueur. So they take these slices, have it macerate in alcohol, and after a period of time, filter, add a touch of sugar, although much of the sweetness does come from these baby cones, and that's it. And while you're maybe picking up notes of forest berries and menthol, this really is just made from the pine cones, sugar, and water. Our producer, Josef Hofer, they've been making Zierbenschnaps in various forms since their founding in 1797. It's their thing, and they're still today. It's still made by the very same family that traced their lineage back even further past the founding of the Josef Hofer. They're in the same village of Göttingen, which is near the ski villages of Schladming in Steiermark. So, you wonder, how do you mix with it? Well, it makes for a cool old fashioned. You see in the picture. No joke, what we call the Alpine Hippie Juice. And there's a really great pairing with pale ale. This combination was long on the menu at New York's Gramercy Tavern. You'll find these and more recipes on our website. So you probably wonder, well, how do they drink it in Austria? They drink it neat, après-ski or after dinner. It's quite an experience. You get your first taste of it at dusk, and then the next morning when you throw open the curtains, look out to see the snow conditions, you see the sun, and then you see the trees, and you think back to that taste that you've had, and you'll never forget that moment. And what for some are memories of the great ski hills. For others, it's a memory of their hike in the woods, golf outing, even decorating the Christmas tree. So, believe it or not, Sir Ben's was our very first product, together with an Alpine cream liqueur, when we started House Alpens 15 years ago. So we've come a long way together. And I'll say on behalf of our team, we're happy to have joined this tradition, which stretches back over 200 years. So please join us. Prost.
All still here.
Hey, everyone. I don't think I'm on screen yet. But I'll start talking. This is Jake Parrott from the House Alpens national team. I've been doing some of the answering in the Q&A and in the chat. And we've got a few questions queued up for Q&A. And I'm hoping we'll get our faces up here pretty soon, but we'll start with we can at least get started with the questions. I don't want to. It's bad TV to just sit here and wait. So the first question we can certainly ask and get going. So this question comes from our friend Bobby Burgess down in Mississippi, and she asks, what are ways that we recommend getting guests into vermouth and other aromatized wines? Here we go. And so, talking about at a bar or restaurant, but I think it's equally relevant in terms of retail, of getting folks drinking these things, not just thinking them as things to mix with gin or whiskey. And so I think Eric, do you want to start off on that one? And then I might bring in some other folks.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest is, what you'll experience when you go to Spain, and literally just sweet red vermouth on the rocks with a bag of potato chips on the side, just to have that sweet and savory combination. You can also take a drink that the guest might like and adjust with the proportions. So if you do take your Manhattan, try it as a 3-to-1, vermouth to whiskey. So, that's for starters. I don't know. Any other thoughts, Jake?
One of the things that I always like to talk about when it comes to aromatized wines is pairing them with food. There are certain things about things that are bittersweet, especially when they also have the acid and refreshing characteristic of wine as a backbone, that work particularly well with some of my team don't like it when I call them snacks, but we'll call them snacks, cheeses, meats, olives, things like that. And I sort of look at it in this way. Salt reduces the perception of bitterness, right? Think about seasoning a vegetable soup. And so the saltiness in what you're eating will help kind of round out the flavors of an aromatized wine. At the same time, though, bitterness does a wonderful job of scrubbing fats and proteins off the palate you know, in a way that normal wine or beer doesn't. And so it keeps the palate refreshed, and it really marries with those kinds of foods really, really well. And another thing to think about is that, you know, an aperitif and a digestif are the same thing. And so if you're beginning a nice dinner or dinner party in later times, and you put out these sorts of easy to serve foods, you want something that people can pour themselves just in a glass on ice that will go with the food that they're pairing with it, but will keep them hungry for all the dinner you're making for them. And so there's a lot of different angles you can take in that regard. In a restaurant setting, the same thing. If you're having a little bit of something before dinner, it's gonna clean right up and keep you hungry and ready for a bottle of wine rather than maybe one glass of wine. Lee, did you want to bring out anything else? You're muted, Lee.
All right, there I am. What did you ask me, Jake?
A question on it's Bobby's question from the beginning. Ways to get guests, whether it's retail guests or restaurant guests, into drinking aromatized wines beyond thinking of them as cocktails.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the on-premise, in fine dining even. I used to call dry and sweet vermouth salt and pepper. They are things that make the food taste better. And I always wanted to try to get some element of a bitter component into a drink before the server sells that nice bottle of wine, because the flavors of that nice bottle of wine and the flavors, everything that's on the plates, are going to be better received after they've had a bitter element in that starter drink. So, I mean, to Bobby's, question, how do you get them into it? Well, when they're having trouble deciding what they want, give them 1.5 ounces of Dolin Blanc with a slice of orange and let them think about, what else they're thinking about. And then when you come back to them, they're going to be in love with Dolin Blanc. That's just an easy thing to do for me. But yeah, hope I answered the question well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question comes from Mike Abbott. And this is a common question that we get, so we wanted to bring it out. Asking about the lifespan of aromatized wines after refrigeration. And then, Mike works at a high volume cocktail bar. So they take the aromatized wines out for service and put them in the well and then return them back to the fridge, and wondering if the heating and cooling shortens that shelf life or affects the wines too much in those ways. And if so, what would you recommend? We have on staff someone who ran the beverage program for a very prominent restaurant group in his old hometown. And so I'm going to let Lee Edwards go on this one.
It's a great question. Our standard procedure was, the bottles stay inside the refrigerator overnight and at all times during the day when they're not being used. From 5 to 10 p.m. when dinner service was hot and heavy, that's when they stayed out in the speed rail. But 19 hours a day, they were in refrigeration. We were using the bottles fast enough. They were rotating at the least every 2 to 3 days. So we never had an issue. I would just say, make sure your cocktail list is always tooled to where those aromatized wines are being used and turned over faster. Just like you do your Pinot Noir, just like you do your, Muscadet. Make sure things are turning over faster.
Awesome. We have a couple of guests that we'd like to bring on to chat about a few things and ask a question. Our first guest comes from the Green Zone, a fantastic and highly innovative but very casual bar in Washington, D.C. It's where I discovered the joys of mixing Lebanese arak, which is an anise distillate, with our Cap Corse Métis Rouge, amongst other things. The owner's name is Chris Hassan Franke, and Lee is going to bring him up, and he's got a question for Eric.
God, yeah. Sorry, Jake. I found him.
Yeah.
One moment, Chris.
Okay, can you hear me?
There he is.
All right. So, Eric, I had a question for you. And I wanted to know how many of the brands were existing brands, and if so, where you found them, and how many were created like to fill a niche that you wanted to fill?
Good question. I guess in our mind, we think of the producers, and we didn't make any of the producers. That I can tell you with certainty. And most of what we represent and what you've tasted, they're traditional products. They're not things that we created by our own imagination. There have been a few instances where there was nothing currently on market. A good example would be the St. Elizabeth Allspice Dram. There was no allspice, or some would call it pimento dram, in North America, and the one product that was still being made in Jamaica was no longer made with rum. So in that instance, while we had a series of recipes to work from, there we did have to put a brand name on it, although it's, as a brand name, it's named for the town near where much of the allspice on the island is grown. So that being St. Elizabeth. So, did that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, that was pretty good. I also wanted to know, so you have some of these really iconic historic brands like Dolana and Cookie, and what did it take to get those to the U.S. and how did you find them?
In most cases, it was by introduction of others who had them in the past, or in some cases they knew the producer. And so, it's largely gone by personal referral. I mean, in some cases we tracked down the owner, as in the case of Cap Course. But yeah, it's more often than not, it is by personal referral.
Okay, got it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Lee?
Are we going to introduce the next? Okay. All right, Natasha, you are audible now.
Hello. This has been wonderful to watch and listen to you all today. I know we didn't directly address it, and I was going to bring up a concept about Hayman's gins, and it's something that I've understood to be true about Hayman's, but please correct me if I am wrong. When I went up to the old distillery, it had been communicated to me that each of the range of Hayman's gins are created from the same range of specific botanicals within all of the gins, and then left to the distillation process and distiller for how long or how much are in each. So for example, London Dry versus the Old Tom, etc., that it's a slightly different time and process and amount of each of the botanicals in the gin that kind of distinguishes each of the specific gins. Is this something, what is the idea about using the same botanical blends within these gins rather than some crazy range of botanicals within them? I've found this exciting within the distillation process of Hayman's, but I know it's something, Hayman's is a brand that's been around for so long. I've always wanted to know the answer to this, why each of them just kind of have that same range of botanicals in them, yet they all have a different palette between these gins. I thought this was an exciting attribute of the Hayman's gin portfolio.
Well, I'll take a stab at that. There are two ways to explain it. I mean, they're as traditional as it comes in terms of what they do and their continuation of historic botanicals as they did from their earliest days. So there's very little impetus by their identity to, make a new gin out of the box with a different botanical set. But also, for them, their gins are sort of a byproduct of evolution, that the London Dry grew out of their Old Tom, the Slow used their London Dry as its base. So, for them, it's sort of a continuum. and that they found that their toolkit of botanicals, still was worthy. That's what made sense to them. Does that answer your question?
I think also that oftentimes when you taste gin, especially when you taste gin neat, that oftentimes what you're tasting is kind of where things that are on your palate that haven't been overloaded by the super concentration of distillates, of the distilled botanicals. And so the test of time that I talked about earlier really is, gets to that idea of how different botanicals express at different volumes on different parts of your palate. And these mixtures really, the different mixtures, and they use different proportions in each gin of those Hayman 10 botanicals to get, to make not just gins that are historically accurate, they are historical gins. Oftentimes when you dilute them, like we did with the Hayman's London Dry, it'll actually even show up, those differences and those expressivenesses will show up even more.
I mean, I think this was a wonderful explanation, especially as Eric said, they evolved through each other as the classics gins has happened. So that was really great. I didn't know if you want me to ask my second question, but it kind of is leaded in by what Jake just said right now.
Sure, go ahead.
You guys discussed the use of juniper and actually some experiments you did in using juniper distillate to kind of really understand how integral that is to the range of gins you guys use. How would you say that this use of juniper, how it stands out in optimizing not only these classic gins that Hayman's has, but I think they stand strong saying, we create gin for gin lovers. And gin for gin lovers is often optimized in classic cocktails. So maybe connecting this, like, why is that correct? And why is that, I often recommend Hayman's as not only the London Dries, but all the range as something great for classic cocktails. If you could say kind of maybe elaborate on this.
Absolutely. 3 points. First of all, if a gin is particularly herbaceous, like a lot of modern gins are, or floral, I find it doesn't work very well with vermouth. And so many of the classic gin canon cocktails are vermouth drinks. Vermouth itself is herbaceous and often floral. If a gin is particularly citric, as a lot of modern gins are, because people like citrus, I find it doesn't work that well in sour cocktails. You want to be bringing something else to the party when the lemon is bringing the sour. And last, the simple fact of that, if you pass those two tests, that the core of utility in classic cocktails is this idea of dilutability. When you dilute it, does it express? When you dilute it, does it express juniper? So it's got to be concentrated in flavor, and it's that dark, rich character. I find it on the middle back of my tongue it's that juniper that's going to come through in a classic gin. Remember, the original raison d'etre of gin was to get juniper into people because people wanted juniper. It was a craze before quinine was a craze. And so the point of gin was to taste like juniper. But what juniper tastes like when you distill it is maybe not so easy.
Absolutely.
So
Thank
cool.
you.
Thanks, Natasha. Natasha, if you don't know, runs an amazing bar in St. Louis and also does a ton of advocacy work for the category of gin all over the world.
Well, Jake, it was great to see you again.
Yeah.
And the rest of you.
Cool. All right, I've got a couple more questions left. I think we're on the gin thing right now. So Ann Williams put in a question that we get a lot, and so I wanted to get this out once and for all, and I'll let Eric do it. Question was, what is the technical definition of Old Tom? The Hayman's Old Tom, which is clear, is its own thing, but Anne always thought that Old Tom gins were barrel aged, and so I'll send you to Eric.
Forgive me if I sound like the catalog in the sense of, Old Tom gin is a historic style that's very rich and rounded in profile, and there's a touch of sweetness that's there that rounds out and amplifies the flavors within. British Old Tom, much like all gin, as soon as it was ready, it was, well, back when there were barrels, it was wheeled off to the bar for service, and for service right away. There's very little history in the UK of intentionally aging gin. Gin, again, I mean, the early consumers of gin were looking for that juniper taste, in part because they believed there were some medicinal properties, as well as the value of the other spices that they tasted. So they wanted to taste spice. This understanding of a role of wood with gin is very much an American story. It's the story of barrels traveling across the ocean and then across the country. And you know, by the time it reached its end point, yes, some flavor and elements of the wood had married into the product. And so that took on an identity, but that's by virtue of travel. And this is very much an early 19th century story that I think it was in the 1860s or so. There was a Bottle Act passed in the UK, after which point all products sent out, including gin from the UK, had to go in bottle. This was done largely for tax protection reasons. So, and this is not in any way to denigrate the presence of, you know, wooded gins. Some can be quite interesting, but it's not part of the UK gin history story.
Yeah, I sometimes say if you think that Old Tom gin is supposed to be dark brown in color, pour yourself a little bit of Laphroaig 10-year-old and hold it up to the light. That spent 10 years in barrels, far more useful for maturing spirits than anything the gin was shipped in, and it's almost colorless. So another way to look at kind of the same thing if you want to make a comparison. All right, just a couple more left. Next one comes from Linda Tetro in New Mexico. It's for Scott, and it's a pretty simple one. Why did the Damsons go in gin rather than just in alcohol or other booze?
Well, that's, you know, a simple convergence of, you know, where there's an abundance of fruit or wild-grown fruit and, you know, whatever the popular spirit is in that particular region. So particularly in Western Europe, where gin was popular and is popular, and an abundance of small, tart, flavorful plums that, you know, if you don't use them, they're otherwise food for the deer. So people would go to their cottages and pick these plums and basically steep them in gin for long periods of time. So that's basically the short answer on the history of these fruit-based gin liqueurs.
Awesome, thank you, Scott. We had a question in the chat, came from Nelson Escalante, and this is, we got a couple of questions at the end that are kind of broader questions, especially geared to the retail side. So these are for Eric. Nelson's question was, are there any limited release or anniversary products or sort of special selection products that we bring in for the US market?
More so on the Soda selection side, but we do, well, here we go. Currently, we do have gift-wrapped Hayman's London Dry, as well as Hayman's Sloe Gin. Those are currently available. And I know early next year, there will be a special vermouth release. More on that when we have it. And yeah, it's something that we, you know, can do from time to time. I mean, admittedly, it's a tricky thing, you know, taking things, especially aromatized products, through the full regulatory cycle for what might be a very short run. But anyway, what we have right now are those gift wrap bottles while we still have them.
Awesome, thanks, Eric. And then the question, the broader question, which I think is a great one to kind of serve as a way to provide some inspiration as we come to the end today, comes from Stan Moreno Sharp. And the question is there any advice you can give for us on the retail side as to how to present liqueurs, aperitifs, and spirits such as these when we can't quite taste them like a bar would be able to? A lot of these are very complex stand rights, and tastes would tell, but for those of us who don't opt the option, what do you say?
I'll take a run at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll hark back to the slide that I had earlier, that many of these items have a core flavor profile, a core element that people can connect with. That, you know, Amaro Sfumato, the name and the painting technique may be unfamiliar, and it may be thoroughly irrelevant because it smells and tastes like a campfire, and people can relate to that. You know, the smell of a Christmas tree, the walk in the woods, you know, like with Amaro Pasubio, blueberries. A lot of people like blueberries. So you find a point of connection with people, and, you know, as long as you articulate that, you know, don't be scared by the unfamiliar word, and that things that say Amaro don't necessarily mean that they're crazy bitter. But for so many of these things, there is a common point of reference that people can relate to and use in, you know, in everyday drinks.
And if you want to feature them as a retailer in your email blasts, we are happy to help you with copy and cocktail suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, I think that's about all we have time for today. There's a couple of lingering questions that we will get to folks on email. And I really appreciate everyone coming out. And Eric, do you have any final words?
Thank you. Really appreciate your time today.
All right, everyone. You'll get a link tomorrow, probably sometime tomorrow, to a video that you can rewatch if you'd like and share with others. Have a great afternoon and good day.